My wife and I have been together close to 35 years now. We got married when I was just 20 and she was 19. We had our fair share of arguments and reconciliations, but I always believed that loyalty was something we both held sacred. No matter where life took me, she was always by my side. Together, we raised two wonderful kids, a son named Ben and a daughter named Sarah. They are adults now, with families of their own, and they have blessed us with grandchildren who bring us so much joy. For years, I thought we would spend our later years together, surrounded by the love of our grandkids. I am a surgeon by trade and served 25 years in the Army, reaching the rank of colonel in the medical corps. I have been retired for 7 years now, though retired feels like an exaggeration, as I still work part-time at a private clinic. These days, I rarely handle a scalpel. Age catches up, but I still see patients. My wife, Linda, works at an advertising firm as a designer. Financially, we are comfortable. At this point, we work more for the enjoyment of it than out of necessity. During my military years, I was stationed in places like South Korea, Germany, and Iraq, countries where American forces often serve. But a doctor's work is practically non-stop, and I rarely had the time to truly see those places. Each time I returned home, I was certain I had a loving wife and kids waiting for me. Or so I thought. That sense of security, however, turned out to be just an illusion. Linda has always been beautiful, even as she aged. She took great care of herself, maintaining a youthful figure and a face without many wrinkles. When we walked together, people often assumed she was much younger, which both amused and flattered me. But as it turns out, my pride and confidence were misplaced. Then, on a chilly November night, everything changed. Have you ever noticed how the darkest moments seem to happen on those cold, rainy fall evenings, as if nature itself is conspiring to pull us down? That night, the wind howled, and rain ran down the windows in streams. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through old medical files for an upcoming health check, trying to locate my vaccination records. Linda wasn't home, she had gone to pick up some groceries for our Sunday dinner. As I leafed through the yellowed papers, my eye fell on something that left me stunned. It was a record from Linda's medical file, dated shortly after I had been away on a long deployment. This was around 4 years after our daughter Sarah was born. The record mentioned a pregnancy and a premature birth, a 6-month-old baby who only survived for 3 days. The blood work showed that the baby had an O blood type and a negative Rh factor. I was floored. Linda and I both have A blood types and positive Rh factors. That child could not have been mine, and to make matters worse, I was not even in the country when this happened. I sat there, frozen, staring at the paper, unable to think straight. My wife had been unfaithful while I was overseas, gotten pregnant, and nearly had a child with another man. Just minutes before, I had felt so secure in the life we'd built together, so certain we had a solid future. Now, all I could see were fragments of the past and a crumbling foundation. I forced myself to stay calm, carefully putting the documents back in their place. My first impulse was to confront Linda the moment she walked through the door, but I knew I needed a clear head before I made any hasty decisions. I thought about our kids, Ben and Sarah. They were undoubtedly mine, they both looked like me, shared our blood type, and carried so much of me in them. But that did not lessen the ache inside. I could not understand why she would do this to me. We had loved each other deeply, and I had devoted myself to her completely. Though I was young and had options, there was never anyone else in my heart but her. Needing to clear my mind, I stepped out onto the balcony for some air. Glancing down, I noticed a car pulling into our driveway under the dim streetlight. After a moment, Linda stepped out, followed by a man. He opened the back door, handed her some bags, and she gave him a quick peck on the cheek before heading inside while he got back into the car and drove away. The front door creaked open, and I heard Linda call out, "Daniel, you're home." Her voice carried through the house, unexpectedly loud, and at that moment, I knew I could not keep quiet any longer, I needed answers. She entered the kitchen, setting down the groceries and smiling, clearly in a good mood. "Let me get dinner ready," she said casually, giving me a puzzled look. "What is it? You look upset," she asked, leaning in to kiss me, her breath carrying a faint hint of champagne. "Do not wrinkle your nose," she said with a grin, wiping the lipstick off my cheek. I had a little champagne. I steadied myself and asked, "So, he gave you a ride?" For a brief moment, she looked caught off guard, then gave me an odd look. "Oh, Daniel, do not blow this out of proportion," she said, trying to sound casual. "I just caught a ride with an acquaintance." "What is the big deal?" "It must be quite an acquaintance, if you felt the need to kiss him goodbye," I replied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. Needing to calm down, I rose and went to the cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey as Linda's face turned pale with worry. How did you know?" she asked softly. "I saw you saying goodbye to the driver from the balcony," I replied, doing my best to stay composed and keep from raising my voice. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and gestured to the chair. "Sit down, I have some questions for you." I pulled out a stool from under the table and took out my briefcase, opening it to reveal the damning document. "Explain this," I said, placing the paper in front of her. She flipped through a few pages carefully before suddenly pulling her hand away. "Where did you get this?" she asked, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "What does it say, Linda? Who got you pregnant? What happened?" I asked, too stunned to even take a sip of the drink in front of me. She was silent for a moment, then spoke in an unexpectedly calm tone. "This was bound to come out someday, maybe it's for the best that it's happening now," she said, her voice steady. "During one of your long absences, I met a younger man, he was 11 years younger than me. I became obsessed. I couldn't control myself. First, we went on dates, then I took the kids to my mother's, and he moved in with me. We lived together like husband and wife, and I got pregnant. He even asked me to marry him," she continued, her voice filled with nostalgia and regret. "I secretly hoped you would never come back so that we could start a new life. But things didn't go as planned. The baby was born early and didn't survive past 3 days. At this, she began to cry. I guess I neglected our other children after that. We grew distant, and eventually, he left me for someone else. After a while, I pulled myself together, brought the kids home, and waited for you to return. I met you at the door, pretending like nothing had ever happened. And for years after, I played the part of the devoted wife. I was in shock, utterly speechless. I just sat there, staring at the wall, unable to process what she had told me. But that was not the end. 6 months ago, he came back to town," she continued, her voice calm, almost emotionless. "The old feelings resurfaced. All these years, I've loved him, and now he's back. I've been seeing him again, and I want to start a new life with him. There is no place for you in that life. I've spent the best years with you, but now that the kids are grown, I need to be with the man I truly love." Each word felt like a blow, her expression as detached as an executioner performing his duty. For a moment, we both sat in silence. Finally, I poured myself another whiskey and downed it, but the taste barely registered. I looked at the bottle in the light, it had the right light brown color of aged Irish whiskey, but it seemed to have no effect. I poured another, wondering if I should just drink straight from the bottle. Linda sat across from me, saying nothing, watching me as though she was calculating her next move. She had fooled me for so many years, if I had not found that medical record, I would still be living in ignorance. She had played her role well. Without a word, I stood up, pushed the stool aside, and went into the bedroom. I grabbed a few things, threw them into a bag, and headed toward the door. "Daniel," her voice lingered in the air, almost a question. "You don't need to go out at this hour." She looked at me, her silhouette dark against the dimly lit kitchen. I gave her a last look, shrugged, and walked out, shutting the door as gently as I could. The autumn night greeted me with a damp chill as I stepped onto the sidewalk, yellow leaves scattering around my feet. I had a sudden urge to smoke, even patted my pockets out of habit, but found nothing. I had quit over 20 years ago, at Linda's insistence, because she was worried about my health. It was late, the streets nearly empty, houses dark, with only streetlights casting pale halos on the ground. My phone buzzed. Linda was calling. I turned it off, feeling a wave of despair so intense I had to bite down on my coat collar to keep from crying out. What now? Where would I go? Walking away felt like the right choice, but where to? I thought about going to see my kids, but they had enough on their plates. I never had anyone else, no lover, no one else but Linda and my work. I wandered through the quiet streets, dodging puddles and wet leaves, wondering if I'd ever find any peace again. Hey, buddy, got a smoke? Someone called out, interrupting my thoughts. I turned around, and everything suddenly went black. A blinding light flashed as though a squad of military searchlights had been aimed right at me. Finally, said a voice close by. I struggled to turn my head. Welcome back, Daniel, came a familiar voice from nearby. My boss looked at me, his face filled with relief. You're in the clinic. They brought you in with a head injury last night. They found your ID and called us. We operated immediately. As I began to process where I was, my first thought was of my family. Did you tell my wife? Yes, we notified your wife and your children. Your son is on his way, he replied. At that moment, the door creaked open, and my son, Ben, stepped in, looking worried but relieved. Dad, how are you feeling? He asked, placing a gentle kiss on my cheek. You had us all on edge. He set a small bag on the nightstand, filled with fruits and juices I could not yet have. Mom could not come. She had some things to take care of, he added, trying to straighten my blanket. She doesn't need to come, I replied softly. Ben's expression told me he knew everything. I could not help but wonder what Linda had told Ben. What do ex-wives usually say in these situations? He did not love me, he neglected me, he crushed my spirit, those kinds of things, I imagined. After I was discharged from the hospital, Linda came by to visit twice, but I refused to see her. The past was the past, and for the first time, I rented a small apartment near the clinic where I worked, starting my new life as a single man. The end of my marriage had a twofold impact on me. On one side, I was dealing with the pain of betrayal, and on the other, I faced an uncertain future, free of attachments. One thing I was sure of, I would not be entering any new relationships. This experience had left me thoroughly vaccinated against love. Soon after, the divorce was finalized, and not only was I without a wife, but I had also lost my home. My kids took a neutral stance, though it was clear they leaned more toward their mother's side. Back at work, I threw myself into surgeries, using the intensity to drown out my emotional pain, and it worked. I did not fall into alcohol, as some heartbroken men do. About 2 months later, an old friend reached out and asked to meet. Daniel, remember a few years back when I borrowed that large sum from you? He began. Of course, I remembered. 3 years ago, Bill had borrowed a considerable amount of money from me. He was facing a major crisis in his business, and he had no one else to turn to. I had recently sold my late mother's apartment, so I had the money to help him out. I had not set a deadline for repayment, understanding that it would take time for him to get back on his feet. Bill's business eventually bounced back, but he had never mentioned repaying the loan. I knew that if I brought it up, I risked losing our friendship. My father had once told me, when you lend money to a friend, think of it as a gift. If you value that friend, do not ask for it back, the time will come, and if they can, they will repay it. Thank you for being there for me back then. I'm doing well now, the business is thriving, Bill said, pulling out a bank card. This covers my debt to you, with interest. The amount was 5 times what I had lent him. With that money, I bought myself a small cottage just outside the city and a car. I was not keen on doing all the housework myself, so I hired an assistant. She was younger than me by nearly 15 years, a woman named Amy. She had been married for almost 20 years to her ex-husband, but they had no children due to her infertility. Eventually, her husband left her for someone else. A neighbor filled me in on her story, as Amy rarely talked about it herself. I had no romantic intentions toward her, none at all. For 6 months, things remained that way. One day, I was outside chopping wood when a sudden, blinding headache hit me, and I blacked out. When I came to, I was in the hospital, and Amy was by my bedside. She had called the ambulance and held my head in her lap until they arrived. Fortunately, it turned out to be just a traumatic brain injury, but recovery was no easy task. After that incident, I started to see Amy in a new light. I realized what a beautiful soul she was, and somehow, our relationship blossomed into something deeper. Eventually, I asked her to marry me, and that fall, we became husband and wife. Knowing we could not have children, I felt free to fully immerse myself in our love. But about 3 months after our wedding, Amy began to feel unwell, plagued by nausea and headaches. I took her to my clinic, and to my utter shock, the doctors confirmed she was pregnant. I remember her telling me, "No matter what you say, I am keeping this child." I held her close and kissed her, realizing at that moment that when one door closes, life often opens another. Things were going well until, just before New Year's, Linda reached out. "We need to meet," she said in a voice that sounded pleading. "I booked a table at a restaurant. Please come by at 7 o'clock. I am begging you." Linda sat across from me, her demeanor humble and filled with regret. "Daniel, forgive me. Not a single day has gone by that I have not thought of you," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, and our children." She continued pouring out her heart, while I sat silently, looking at the woman I once loved so deeply, a woman I would have married without a second thought. She was also the woman who had twice betrayed me, deceived me for nearly 20 years, discarded me for another man, and now, suddenly, was seeking my forgiveness. Linda kept insisting that her time without me had made her realize just how much she loved me, that she finally understood I was the only true man in her life. For some reason, she reminded me of a siren from Greek mythology, luring me into a dream where I believed her heart belonged to me alone. "I am sorry. I am so sorry," she repeated, like a mantra. I watched her bright lipstick-covered lips as she spoke those sweet words and imagined those same lips kissing and whispering to her lover. Did she truly think I would fall for this? Believe her words? That she was confused or unsure of what she wanted? This was the same woman who cheated on me, had a child with her lover, left me, and spent her time with another man without a single thought about me. And now, she was back, claiming she had only ever loved me. At one point, she had found justification for her cruelty, abandoning me without a second thought. She fully enjoyed herself with him, sharing his bed more than once, all while planning the perfect moment to deliver her final, brutal blow. And now here she was, offering me the only thing she had left, though it was already exhausted and worn by her lover. She realized too late that he wanted her only for his amusement, as long as there was money in the picture, and that they had no future together. Realizing she had nothing left, she came crawling back, hoping to reclaim what she had discarded. Does she truly see me as a fool, someone so gullible that I would fall for her deceit again? I listened to her complete monologue of supposed regret, but I had nothing left to say. There was no satisfaction in her remorse, no gloating on my part. In a strange way, I even felt a touch of pity for her. After all, we had shared almost 35 years together. But this meeting had run its course, and just then, my phone rang. It was Amy, calling to let me know where I could pick her up. I jotted down the address and stood up, ready to say my goodbyes. "Is she, your woman?" Linda asked softly, her tear-filled eyes fixed on me. Yes, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Anne, have you been together for long? Yes, for nearly a year and a half now. I stood and looked at her one last time. Goodbye, Linda. I hope you can find some happiness. With that, I walked out of the restaurant. Just before leaving, I glanced back. Linda stood there, hands pressed to her chest, watching me through the restaurant's festively decorated window. Outside, people bustled by, rushing to and fro. I got into my car, turned the ignition, and listened to the engine purr steadily. I turned left, merging into the flow of traffic, moving forward while leaving Linda, and all the memories of our past, firmly behind me.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.